Hello viewers, today we are going to study Sri Aurobindo's Bliss of Identity, which is included in BA 4th semester paper 1 of English Literature taught in STS University, Uttarakhand. Sri Aurobindo is also known as Aurobindo Ghosh. His inclusive years are 1872 to 1950. Was an Indian philosopher, yogi, guru, poet, and nationalist. He was also part of the Indian movement for independence from British rule. Then he became a spiritual reformer by introducing his visions on human progress and spiritual evolution. Today we are going to look at Sri Aurobindo as a poet. Let us discuss Sri Aurobindo as a poet. Sri Aurobindo is hailed today as one of the leading figures of the Indian Renaissance. He was popularly known as a philosopher, a poet, and a critic. He was one of the greatest intellectuals of the 20th century. And like Rabindranath Tagore, he also felt immense pleasure to be called himself as a poet at first place. He had a long poetic career of approximately 60 years, that is from 1890 to 1950. He was also a child prodigy and he started writing poetry since childhood. His poetic career began in England, developed in Baroda, that is on Indian soil, and reached its height at Pondicherry, now Puducherry. He began writing poetry in the same vein as the Romantics at the early stage, but by the later period, a drastic change was seen in his writing. Sri Aurobindo and Mysticism. Aurobindo's poetry in the later years started flowing out from his spiritual or yogic practices. His writing gradually evolved from the romantic lyrics to prophetic or spiritual or full of mysticism. He brought a new consciousness in the realm of consciousness. Hence, the mother, Mira Alfaza, had described him as the adventurer of consciousness. Hence, it can be said that mysticism is all pervading in the poems written by Aurobindo in the later years. These mystical experiences are nothing but the visions that Sri Aurobindo had during the spiritual experience. Thus, he is rightly called as a great mystical poet, as he has colored most of his poems with the mystical experiences. Aurobindo was a seer, a yogi, a poet. He was the one who propounded a philosophy of divine life on earth through spiritual evolution. He wrote many works, but some of the major works are Essays on the Gita, 1922, The Life Divine, 1939, The Synthesis of Yoga, 1948, The Ideal of Human Unity, 1949, and the most important literary work that he produced, Savitri, A Legend and a Symbol, 1950. This was an epic poem. Synthesis of Yoga is what deals with the practical guidance to integral yoga that was developed by Aurobindo himself. Before going to the explanatory part, let us read the poem first. Bliss of Identity. All nature is taught in radiant ways to move. All beings are in myself embraced. O fiery, boundless heart of joy and love, how art thou beating in a mortal's breast? It is thy rapture flaming through my nerves, and all my cells and atoms thrill with thee. My body thy vessel is, and only serves as a living wine cup of thy ecstasy. I am a center of thy golden light, and I its vast and vague circumference. Thou art my soul great, luminous and white, and thine my mind and will and glowing sense. Thy spirit's infinite breath I feel in me. My life is a throb of thy eternity. About the poem. Bliss of Identity is a poem of 14 lines, which is also called as a sonnet. The poem describes a blissful state which the poet experiences during the spiritual practices. So this poem is all about the mystical experience that the poet encounters during the meditative or yogic practices. Aurobindo, as we know, he is a poet at first place, but he is also a great mystic who reveals this blissful state through various images and symbols in the poem. Let us go to the explanation now. Before that, I'd like to tell you that Aurobindo Ghosh is an excellent spokesperson of Indian philosophy, and the core of Indian philosophy is the individual himself is Brahman. He himself is God. God is not a separate entity. So in context of Indian philosophy, the word Brahman is used in place of God, which has a very vast connotation, as Brahman means someone who is absolute, who is infinite, boundless, unknowable. The core of Indian philosophy is Aham Brahmasmi, meaning I am the truth. According to the Indian philosophy, God is within the individual. Hence, they are not two separate entities, but one. Then, naturally, the question arises that if this is so, if the individual is Brahman, and if the God is within the individual, then why are we so ignorant of it? Why do not we realize it? Why don't we realize it? It is just because of the ego. Ego, the I consciousness. There is a huge wall of ego that lies between the individual and the true self, or the soul, which is the divine. When the wall of ego collapses, it is only then the whole ignorance disappears. It recedes, it goes into the background, and the individual realizes. That is called self-realization. That state is called self-realization. So the root word of ignorance is ego, which means I consciousness. So keeping this in mind, we will be moving ahead to the explanatory section. All nature is taught in radiant ways to move. All beings are in myself embraced. O fiery, boundless heart of joy and love, how art thou beating in a mortal's breast? Here, the opening lines of the poem are all nature. Nature in Aurobindonian philosophy is the creator himself. Radiant here means enlightening. The poet, in his blissful state of consciousness, is experiencing how nature works in various ways which are enlightening, which are intelligent, which makes us learn so many things from it, if only we pay attention. So we can learn so many things, he says, from nature and the way it functions. Here the poet is referring to the divine nature. which is the true nature of Brahman or God. This is the state of supreme blissfulness, where there is no feeling of otherness. This is also a state of self-realization, when the individual soul is united with the Absolute, with the Divine, with the Infinite, boundless. The Absolute is fiery. Fiery here means, fiery is, it signifies the enlightenment, the flame, fiery. So fire is, fire is the symbol of enlightenment or light. So he says, the poet addresses the Infinite, who is the heart of all joy and love. The poet is amazed at the thought that how this divine spirit is working through a mortal's breast. He is amazed to see that. In the second stanza, the poet says, "It is thy rapture flaming through my nerves, and all my cells and atoms thrill with thee. My body thy vessel is, and only serves as a living cup of thy ecstasy." Rapture here means divine bliss again, which is flaming through the poet's each and every pore of his body. This rapture is not so much physical, rather it is a mental process that he feels, that the poet feels. That is, from the deepest source, this divine rapture or ecstasy is flaming or bursting out. In one of the book that is we have just discussed, Synthesis of Yoga, Aurobindo says that if one realizes the Brahman, or if a person experiences the self-realization, then even a small iota of this bliss is able to madden one with happiness. Such is the ecstasy that we feel. In that bliss, all the materialistic pleasure falls too short, and it has no significance then, no place. It seems nothing then as compared to this divine joy. So here he says that, the poet says that he is thrilled or excited with this state of self-realization, and he says that all his atoms and cells are taking part in that divine joy. The poet says that this body has become thy means God's vessel, or just a medium, and the duty of the poet, what is the duty of the poet now after attaining this supreme bliss? His duty is now to serve only as a living wine cup of God's ecstasy. Of thy ecstasy means of God's ecstasy. He has just become, he feels that he's become a living wine cup, that his body has become a wine cup of ecstasy or frenzied state of happiness he is talking about. Cup of wine in poetry refers to the life or the pleasure of life, that is, life is often compared with a cup of wine. Therefore, the poet uses the word living. Why? Living emphasizes that not only his soul but his body is also experiencing the same or supreme blissfulness, which is mental process and also a physical process. So both physically, mentally, he is now very much into that process where he is experiencing the divine blissfulness. This is the last stanza. I am a center of thy golden light. Golden light signifies again wisdom or enlightenment or the truth, which is the result of self-realization. So he says, I am a center of thy golden light, and its vast and vague circumference. Thou art my soul, great, luminous, and white, and thine my mind and will and glowing sense. Thy spirit's infinite breath I feel in me. My life is a throb of thy eternity. Here the poet says that he feels himself at the center of wisdom or supreme knowledge. Not only the center, he says, its vast and vague circumference. Vague, which is not clear, vast, infinite, boundless. Now he feels that as if he is seated at the center, and just because he is at the center, he could see the circumference also, which is vague. It's vast and vague circumference, that is margin. Circumference is margin, or the state of ignorance. It might means the state of ignorance. When we are seated at the center, it means that our knowledge is perfect. Center means perfect, and margin means ignorance, ignorant. So using the word vague here means the person standing there is ignorant, and then clarity is not there. Here the poet says that because he is at the center, that is truth, center, he has realizes the truth. He is in the process of self-realization, and so he is able to see the circumference or the vagueness also. He is able to see very clearly where lies the knowledge and what is the ignorance. Luminous, thou art my soul great, luminous and white. Luminous means shining with wisdom or enlightenment. He says, thou art my soul. He is the perfect merger. Here, the perfect merger of Atma and Paramatma. That is according to Indian philosophy, this belief of Atma and Paramatma. Here it is that we see the perfect merger of Atman and Paramatma. And white is always, a color of sacredness, piousness, or purity. Then he says that, and thine my mind and will and glowing sense. My mind means you are there in my mind. You are very much in my mind. Glowing means against light, enlightenment, truth, shining. So at the level of mind, at the level of body, and also at the level of soul, he is experiencing God or Brahman. That means his whole existence, the poet's whole existence, is shining with supreme wisdom, supreme enlightenment and intelligence. And he could see that this is everywhere, the expansion of himself, that he sees that he is the center of this universe. Thy spirit's infinite breath I feel in me. My life is a throb of thy eternity. Here these lines are nothing but the indication of a complete absorption of the eternal spirit of God. Complete absorption of the within, from within, the eternal spirit of God. So here the use of I suggests that we are in our egoistic consciousness. We always have this kind of impression in our mind that this is me, I, this is you. So I indicates a limitation. I have a limitation, that I am finite being, that I cannot be infinite. But in this state of blissfulness, the poet feels the identification of the soul with the eternal, or a person when feels the infinite breath. So he feels the infinite breath within himself. He feels that infinity. So when a person feels this infinity within oneself, he cannot measure the extent of happiness. We cannot measure, or no one can measure the happiness of that person. He says, my life is a throb of thy eternity. Eternity, eternal again suggests the Brahman, the divine, the infinite. So it is something which is not subject of time. Throbbing means pulsing, which means an individual feels that the poet is no more a mortal being now, that the body will die, but something is there which is not going to die, which is going to remain forever, and thus he feels the eternity. Thus he feels this immortality, that why his whole existence is throbbing with pleasure. So this is a poem about self-realization. This is a poet which is about a deep spiritual experience, which is beautifully described with the help of apt images and symbol, and based on one of the belief which is central to the Indian philosophy, that is Aham Brahmasmi, which means that I am none other than the Brahman. So that was all about the poem. Thank you for watching the video.